Well, the EU are up to regulatory shenanigans again. The question is, will this be good for us or will it be bad for us? And with that in mind, here's a quote. Let's not kill one of Europe's few tech success stories. That was a rather damning statement given by the CEO of Supercell, and its latest shot in a war that has been silently raging since April, because that's when the EU unveiled new guidelines for microtransactions in gaming. And now, after a summer of adjustment, the industry is speaking out. Now, obviously, in one way, that's all kind of hilarious, and we do sort of think, yeah, you've rammed our games full of this bullshit, a lot of it has felt fairly manipulative, it's probably good that someone is getting involved. In big picture, that is what I think. That being said, a lot of people in the industry are saying that this will ruin everything that they've built. I mean, just look at what the Supercell dude said. Basically, according to a lot of them, they say these regulations would worsen the player experience and also wouldn't improve protections. And that certainly is a bit that I'm at least interested in. They also say that this would cause widespread collateral damage to one of EU's biggest tech success stories. So here's the thing. He's not entirely wrong. He's not entirely right. There's definitely stuff for us to talk about, and this one's going to be a goddamn trip. And I get this all can be a lot. We've got tariff and trade negotiations affecting everything from Switch 2 pricing to gaming privacy laws, and that means you need a full picture. And that's where Ground News comes in. It's where I go to cut through the clickbait and to understand what's happening. They're today's video sponsor. And here's the story of the EU pushing back against Trump's tech regulation threats. We've got 107 sources here covering it, but a striking 63% on the left, 29% in the center, and only 8% on the right. That's an imbalance that put it straight into Ground News' blind spot feed. And the headline comparison is kind of fascinating here. You've got Le Monde, a left-leaning and rated very high factuality outlet, running EU defends its digital rules as sovereign right after Trump's tariff threat. Another outlet, Americans for Tax Reform, who are right-leaning with mixed factuality rating, flips it, saying Trump slams EU digital regulations as discriminatory attack on US giants. So you see the same diplomatic clashes, but opposite heroes and villains. And just those factualities alone show you where you are or are not seeing spin. So ground actually means what you see is reliable. And when only 8% of right-leaning outlets are touching a major piece of US-EU tech news, yeah, you're kind of missing how this is playing politically. Now, I get all of this with Ground News' Vantage Plan. It gives you bias ratings from 3 independent agencies, side-by-side headline comparisons, and with, say, their tech interest page, you can just see all the tech stories from all the angles. And if you go to ground.news/Bellular, you'll get 40% off unlimited access with the Vantage Plan. That's the plan that I use, and that is the best deal of the year for my subs for limited time. So, if you want to check it out, hit up that link down below. Here's a fun fact to get us going. This was kind of kicked off by a Swedish horse girl game. Yeah, so here we are. Let's get into the story. The autumn legislative sessions are starting, and we're right at the end of the consultation period for the Digital Fairness Act. So, would you like some fairness in digital format? Maybe this act is for you. Now, what it is an overarching EU legislative agenda that covers loads of tech fields and where they intersect with consumer protections. Now, for our purposes, it includes features like deceptive interface design where, well, there's all sorts of shady shit that they do. Manipulative elements, addictive elements, and unfair personalization practices. You might think, oh, I love things to be personalized. Less so whenever a game is trying to exploit you really wanting that next upgrade and is giving you a targeted deal that probably has 900% value or some made-up bullshit like that. Now, it's especially concerned where it hits consumer vulnerabilities and where people can be exploited. Now, you may remember our coverage from back in April, where we got to talk about the Swedish horse girl game. So that's when the EU took on microtransactions, and what happened is that the Consumer Protection Cooperation Network, rolls off the tongue, laid out some new key principles. And this all came as a part of a case made against the Swedish mobile game Star Stables. Now, what we're talking about today, the Digital Fairness Act and its consultation period, it is building on those principles from the whole horse game saga. Now, what that means is new systems requiring real monetary value on listings, not just, made up gem bullshit. Removing multiple currency options, ensuring refunds are available. Imagine that, a refund on a gem. Crazy stuff. And also ending a lot of the FOMO practices. And especially because these things were often targeted toward kids, but also they would apply to everyone because games would need to implement them across the board. Now, at the time, the industry was obviously not really thrilled. They love making money from all of the things that I just listed that feel sketchy. And they framed these as new legal theories, as a disruption that could see games pulled from the EU if those games couldn't comply. Think about the poor monetization designers, guys. But where things left off is that the CPC was supposed to work with them, work with the industry to help implement everything. But 6 months later, the industry mood has not improved, and they are quite worried. That open letter from the Supercell CEO, and by the way, Supercell are the Clash of Clans people, so some top-tier creative gaming content. That's just one of several press efforts that we've seen in recent weeks. But it's the most striking one from a senior figure. Basically, he says that he doesn't want the EU's 27 billion euro industry harmed by the DFA or the guidelines that came in March of this year. And he argues that they will, quote, break how many games fundamentally work, that they will harm the player experience, and especially will do this for free-to-play games. He uses a familiar metaphor for how in-game currency works, but it's one that was okay per the legal framework before the new guidelines in April. And basically he talked about theme park tokens. The idea that a family can buy tokens in bulk, or they can buy tokens individually, or they can even win tokens in a theme park. And to him, this is all framed as, quote, convenient and fun, avoiding repeated cash transactions. The idea you can buy loads of tokens at once. And he then contrasts this with the potential worst case under the new guidelines, where individual parental approval for each token used, including signed contract agreements, regardless of purchase value and all of that, would basically harm the experience. Basically, he's saying that regardless of purchase value, rides must display a real cost in euros based on a fixed standard, not, a token cost. Now, when children win prizes, they believe that those prizes are worth real money, despite obviously not being able to cash out. In his analogy, the visitors get frustrated and leave. Why? Well, because the experience isn't simpler or safer than what exists now. So, why change the token system? Well, his argument, he believes the existing frameworks can just be strengthened. Improve what we've got. Don't do a big new scary thing. Now, we will come back to how Supercell responds to those existing laws later on in this video. But going on, he suggests these new policies could result in companies choosing other monetization models. Things like more in-game advertising. And this feeling has actually got a lot of backing. Multiple large European game developers sent a letter to the EU. And I have to say, a massive thank you to one of our members, Neo Nebulosa, for helping us navigate the fun industrial nuances of the continent. Because for real, this shit's complicated. Now, what happened is that Euractiv saw the letter, and then industry-wide bodies like the European Game Developer Federation also got involved. And they're all very worried, and this is based on legal interpretations of current proposals and what they would mean for them, and of course also what they would mean for you. Let's go to the heart of the issue. This fundamentally comes down to a fairly simple question, but it's one with significant legal ramifications, and it's this. Is in-game currency the same as real currency? Because if it's treated as such, as, quote, digital representations of value, then the companies trading in them face significantly more scrutiny. And if you're thinking about, say, banking, crypto, and other things, yeah, you're kind of thinking along the right lines. Because effectively, they would then be a little bit more like Bitcoin under the law. And to be clear, that is the position of the CPC. And therefore, it's inherent to the current consultation for the Digital Fairness Act, which is the big thing that would really change a lot. Now, the fundamental argument is that people are putting real money into these systems, and they are getting in return for their real money a digital representation of that money in the form of products, like, say, your gems or your Call of Duty points, whatever it may be. So because of that, they should therefore have transparency and safety when they are spending. Now, those are good, noble goals, but implementation could be a little tricky, and it would mean some humongous changes. Now, we can't just dismiss those things because we like the principles behind the changes. And for the avoidance of doubt, we here are very much behind those principles. And what the industry is putting forward really are based on worst case scenarios. But that doesn't mean that they won't happen, and we should talk about it because it would impact the industry. Now, they already don't trust the EU elements implementing all of this, as flagged by George Osborne, well that one, in his excellent video games industry memo newsletter back in April. His sources suggested to him something rather troubling, that before the new guidelines, the CPC did not engage with industry trade bodies, let alone get impact assessments. I know, impact assessments, it's real sexy stuff, but then again, we are dealing with, billions of euro and how the industry literally works. Now, that's part of why these bodies are emphasizing certain facts. Things like, only 18% of kids are allowed to make purchases, that 95% get parental supervision, and that monthly spending has actually gone down year on year, which is at least a silver lining if you're not a fan of microtransactions. But basically, the industry is putting forward that they see all of this stuff as using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. And basically, that's why they've been so frustrated. Now, the CPC suggested that they would work with the industry after they did their big publication. And without direct leaks, we don't literally know what those discussions looked like over the summer. But based on current reactions, they did not go well. But more than that, apparently, the CPC also didn't work with other EU bodies. Yes, this is really getting all quite complex. People may wonder why, nothing ever gets done. Anyway, what it effectively means, the point the industry is trying to get across, right, is that this one group tried to set a new central philosophy in microtransactions, but they kind of did that without getting everyone else involved in the situation involved in what that would look like, which can get messy. And for an example of said mess, we've got to say a big thanks to this pack of Lithuanian RuneScape gold farmers. To put a very messy situation in very simple terms, in Lithuania, currency transfers are tax exempt. So because of this, the gold farmers thought that they would not have to pay value-added tax. But the Revenue Office disagreed. The Revenue Office believed that the gold farmers weren't trading a currency whenever they were doing their trades. So yeah, they were like trading a product. And that would mean that they would need to get their value-added tax. Now, they needed clarity on the law here. So what they did is they went to the EU, and they went to a specific bit called the EU Advocate General. And the result of that was a ruling by the EU Advocate General. And that is that in-game currency should be considered as a digital second-hand product, not as a currency in itself. Now, that's actually quite fun for today's story, because that's actually not how the guidelines from the CPC frame them. Same goes for the Digital Fairness Act proposals as well. And that just makes everything here so much messier, because different bits of the EU, different arms of it, are taking different opinions. Obviously, that makes it very hard to get anything goddamn done. And that's part of why the company seems so pissed off here. To them, the CPC wants compliance with their guidelines, even as another EU judiciary is suggesting another interpretation. So they're, in a way, saying, oh no, look at us, we're caught in the middle, this is a nightmare, what do we do? And honestly, in that case, yeah, they do have a point. It's like different arms of the same body are saying different things about basically the same issue. That's obviously chaos. Chaos that could get worse with the Digital Fairness Act being implemented next year. And that would mean that, well, everything that they work on, these companies that is, may now need to be changed again to comply with the new requirements. Which would be a good thing going solely off the principles, what we're trying to protect and make better here. But, implementation is often the hard bit, and that is why the companies are very much worried. Oh boy, we're getting there. And one thing you may have noticed in this video is it might all sound a little bit schizo. I mean, here I am in 1 second being very much, look at the things the Swedish horse girl game was doing. That's all pretty sketchy. Let's regulate some of this stuff so that, we don't have exploitative bullshit happening that's, aimed at teens and stuff. And then you'll also see me, talking about the industry's points. And to understand this story, I think we've just got to accept a very basic fact. Everyone involved is going to present their argument in the best light that they can. The CPC will. The people at Supercell will. I will. You will. We'll pretty much always be trying to put our argument forward in the best way. And the upshot of that is everyone involved, from their perspective, will play up the risk and then downplay anything that will undermine them. And even if we return to the Supercell dude's letter, you can start to pick holes in some of the logic that he puts forward. If you're going to update his analogy to actually be accurate to the real industry, Well, then his theme parks would be having 3 or 4 or 5 different types of tokens. Just look at, what you see when you open a gacha game and you're just bombarded. And to undermine his points even more, he tries to talk about how, you can win one of the tokens as a prize. Yeah, but in so many of these games, the only thing you can win as a prize is, just for participating in something, is the lowest value of token. But then you can only buy some tokens in massive bundles that don't match the price of the product you're trying to buy, none of which is a good consumer experience, as much as this just web of absolute goddamn insanity does make these companies a hell of a lot of money. And when he talks about wanting to make existing legislation stronger, well, yeah, Supercell would know all that they need to know about that, because they've been accused of being non-compliant with UK loot box regulations. Clearly, self-regulation and current legislation are not working for everyone. That's why we need these changes in the first place. But it is also true that he does have a bit of a point. These bodies should probably have a talk with the industry reps to implement changes in a way that won't have unintended negative impacts. And we have seen many examples of that. As an example, GDPR, you having more control over your data, all that privacy stuff, that's pretty great. But it's really annoying having that pop up every time you go to a website and you got to install an extension to deal with the annoying thing. Yeah, that does kind of suck. I mean, I get the point, I agree with the principle, but the implementation clearly isn't really that great. And where it risks getting worse is that today we've been talking about the concerns from big trade bodies and companies like Supercell. And here's the thing with those groups, they've got money. They can afford to be compliant with new laws, like, say, all the stuff that's been going on with the UK's Online Safety Act and similar laws around the world. The incumbents can fork up the cash to be compliant. They can do that. Hell, if the compliance is a real nightmare, then maybe you can be an entrepreneur and sell the solution. But the smaller teams, the people who are just on the cusp of being sustainable fiscally, well, they'll be hurt more. The worst case scenario is something that looks more like regulatory capture, that perhaps looks like the incumbents adapting to the regulation, but then the regulation being so onerous that new companies basically can't really get started up. That can be really bad. But to cut through all that fluff, something needs to happen. And the reason why is simple. A reckoning is coming, and we are very much on the clock. Here's the deal. The Digital Fairness Act is expected to be delivered in the next year or so. And what's happening right now is the ending of the consultation period for the virtual currency stuff. And clearly, after 12 weeks of consultation, well, these companies have been reacting in this way to make a point that they don't want the Digital Fairness Act legislators to treat them the way that the CPC allegedly treated them, with all of that Swedish horse girl stuff. They basically want a chance to make sure that their voices are heard. And you know what? That is their right. They are literally entities contributing to the economy within the EU. So yeah, they should have a seat at that table. I want them to be listened to and respected, but also treated with the skepticism that is due, because they are very much not unbiased here. And just as these companies need to turn a profit, they also need to do so in a way that is not predatory toward the public. And ultimately, it's that last bit that's where I land. You can see enough horror stories of this stuff going bad, or even just the simple, basic goddamn thing. You look at your phone, there's a social media app that's just trying to play around with your brain chemistry to get you hooked. You open a video game, and now it's doing the same thing. There's all this predatory bullshit everywhere. I don't know about you, but I've had enough. And the profit of these businesses is, yes, relevant to them, the shareholders. But it's also not goddamn sacred. And the whole point of governments and bodies like these is that we can be represented, and in some way, we have some buy-in to the rules of the game that everyone should be able to play fairly, which is a bit of a stupidly optimistic, lofty-ass goal. But in this case, you know what? If they make less money because they're not allowed to be as manipulative and people lose their jobs because of that, that's okay. Maximizing employment's not the only fucking goal. There's other stuff going on. There are negative externalities. That's another thing to consider. Yes, you could just deregulate gambling to the tits and then tax it and say, look at our number go up. But then you can also think about the negative externalities on society that are a result of sad gambling bollocks. And don't worry, you guys in the US are heading in the direction that the United Kingdom has been in for a long ass time regarding the old online sports betting. Anyway, I think you guys see the point. Yes, these guys should be listened to, etc., etc. But you know what? We should have some say in the goddamn rules, and people have had enough. I know this wasn't the most light and breezy video in the world, so palate cleanse yourself. Watching this one next.